The stars, once a symbol of humanity's expansion, now seemed to mock them. The Terran Alliance, humanity's last hope, had been pushed to the brink of destruction. Across the galaxy, the Zorath Empire, a brutal and unforgiving alien force, had begun its sweep through the colonies. It was a war like none before. The Zorath had advanced rapidly, their military might overwhelming every defense humanity had thrown at them. Now only a handful of the Alliance's strongest fleets remained, scattered and hopeless, fighting to hold on to the few systems still under human control. For months, the Terran fleet had been in retreat. One colony after another fell. Worlds that had once thrived with human life were now reduced to smoldering ashes. The news from the front lines was grim, and it seemed as though humanity would be wiped from the stars. Captain Lydia Matthews sat in the command chair of the TSS Perseverance, one of the last remaining warships in the fleet. The ship, heavily, damaged and barely holding together, drifted through the black void of space. Her face was tense, eyes glued to the holographic map that flickered in front of her. On the screen, the Zorath fleet closed in on yet another system. Lydia's mind raced. How did it come to this? She thought, clenching her fists. We were once the ones expanding across the stars, bringing order and peace to the galaxy. Now we're on the edge of extinction. The commanders of the remaining fleets had been in constant communication, but every transmission felt like the last. They all knew it. The Zorath were closing in. Soon, they would face the final battle, and the Terran Alliance would fall unless something extraordinary happened. Lydia was not alone in her thoughts. Around her, the bridge crew worked tirelessly, trying to maintain what little control they had over the situation. Ensign Malik stood at the communications station, his face pale from stress and exhaustion. Lieutenant Tessa Brooks, the weapons officer, was adjusting the targeting systems, though they knew they had little ammunition left to fire. The TSS Perseverance was running on fumes, and morale was at an all-time low. Captain, Malik's voice broke through the silence. We've just received another report from Sector 12. The Zorath fleet has completely wiped out the last human defenders in the Proxima system. They're on their way here next. At this rate, we won't last more than a few days. Lydia took a deep breath, holding herself steady. We won't give up that easily, Ensign. Humanity doesn't surrender. We find a way. Her words, though firm, felt hollow in her own ears. She knew the truth. They were outmatched. The Zorath Empire's ships were far superior in technology and firepower. No matter how many tactics or strategies they used, humanity's fleet was a shadow of its former self. We've got one shot left, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the others to hear. If we can't hold them off here, we might as well make sure they remember who they're dealing with. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. They were on the edge of despair, and yet Lydia's words were the spark they needed. Her reputation as a fierce and determined leader was one of the few things keeping them from completely breaking down. They had fought hard, but this would be their final stand. It would take something extraordinary to turn the tide in their favor. As Lydia glanced at the view of space outside the ship, her thoughts drifted to the countless lives that had already been lost. Every world that had fallen to the Zorath had been a reminder of how fragile humanity's existence was in the vast universe. But Lydia knew one thing. Even if humanity was small in the grand scheme of things, they were not helpless. Ensign, Lydia said, her voice suddenly sharp. Get me in contact with Admiral Ortiz. A few moments later, the holographic image of Admiral Mateo Ortiz appeared on the screen in front of her. His face was grim, but there was a certain resolve in his eyes. Captain Matthews, he said with a nod. We're all in the same situation. The Zorath are nearly at our doorstep. We've lost contact with 3 fleets already. Our forces are spread too thin, and our resources are dwindling. It's a matter of time before they overwhelm us. I know, Lydia replied. But we can't give up just yet. We need to act fast. I've been looking at the Zorath's tactics. They're confident. They think they've won already. They're underestimating us. Ortiz raised an eyebrow. Underestimating us? How do you mean? Lydia stood up, her mind racing with the plan she had been working on in silence for hours. I'm proposing a final strike. We pull back, gather every remaining ship in the system, and launch a surprise offensive. We might not have the numbers, but we have something they don't. Unpredictability. The Zorath are methodical, and we can use that against them. Ortiz was silent for a moment, considering the idea. He knew it was a risky move, but then again, humanity had always been about taking risks, especially when there was no other option. I'll gather the fleet, Ortiz finally said. This is a desperate move, Matthews. If this fails, we're done for. Lydia's gaze hardened. Then let's make sure it doesn't fail. As the call ended, Lydia sat back down in her chair. She knew the plan was their last hope, and it had to work. There was no time to hesitate. We've got a few hours, Lydia said, turning to her crew. I want every ship to be ready. This will be humanity's final stand. We're going to make them regret underestimating us. The crew nodded, their faces set in grim determination. There was no more room for fear. They had no choice but to fight for their survival. Outside, the stars seemed to mock their tiny ship, the TSS Perseverance, drifting alone against the vastness of space. But within the hearts of the humans aboard, a fire burned. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. They would bring hell to their enemies. The TSS Perseverance glided through space, its engines humming with the last of their power. The quiet hum was almost soothing, but for Captain Lydia Matthews, it only served as a reminder of how close they were to the edge. Every part of the ship seemed to groan under the weight of the mission ahead, and yet the crew held on, determined to make their last stand count. Captain, came the voice of Ensign Malik from the communications console. He had been working without rest, tracking the progress of the Zorath fleet as it steadily advanced toward their position. The enemy is nearly in range. They'll be here within hours. Lydia's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of her chair as she nodded. The Zorath Empire had crushed everything in its path, and it wasn't just the fleets or the planets they had destroyed. It was the spirit of humanity itself. But something in Lydia refused to let it end this way. Her thoughts were interrupted as the voice of Lieutenant Tessa Brooks echoed from the weapons station. Captain, we've repaired the main cannons as best we could, but we don't have enough power for a full salvo. We'll be lucky if we get off 1 or 2 shots before they close in on us. Lydia stood up, walking to the view screen and staring out into the vast empty space before her. There was nothing, only the cold blackness of the void. But behind that, there was something else, a legacy of human defiance. We don't need a full salvo, Lieutenant, she said, her voice steady, though it carried an undeniable fire. What we need is to show the Zorath what happens when they push humanity to the brink. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Even after everything they had gone through, the thought of fighting the overwhelming Zorath forces still seemed impossible, but it was their only option. Captain, we've just received confirmation, Malik said, breaking the silence. Admiral Ortiz is gathering the remaining fleets. They'll be ready to move out soon. But there's more. A new fleet has just arrived from Earth. They're led by a new commander. Lydia's brow furrowed at the unexpected news. A new commander? They had been operating on the assumption that the Terran fleet was all but done for. So who could be leading this new force? Before she could voice her thoughts, a message came through the comms. The face of an unfamiliar officer appeared on the screen, his expression serious but resolute. I am Commander Jackson Reed, the man said, his voice calm but strong. I'm in charge of the reinforcements coming from Earth. We've heard about your situation, Captain Matthews, and we're here to help. Lydia felt a flicker of hope. The reinforcements were their lifeline, and this Commander Reed, whoever he was, would be the one to lead them through the coming storm. Commander Reed, Lydia said, her tone respectful but guarded. We're on the edge of annihilation. We have a fleet that's been battered to the brink and our resources are nearly gone. How do you plan on turning the tide? Reed's face remained steady. Captain, we may not have numbers on our side, but we have something that will give us an edge. Surprise. Earth's forces have developed a new form of warfare, one that the Zorath won't expect. Lydia raised an eyebrow. A new form of warfare? She had heard rumors of secret weapons, but nothing concrete. She could feel the weight of the moment, pressing down on her. "Explain," she said. Reed nodded. "The new fleet carries experimental tech, modified stealth ships, advanced energy shields, and most importantly, weapons that can disrupt the Zorath systems. The Zorath have always relied on their superior firepower, but they don't understand the danger of human innovation. We'll use their overconfidence against them." The idea sounded promising, but Lydia remained cautious. "You're talking about a surprise strike, but the Zorath are already aware of our position. How can we catch them off guard?" "Trust me, Captain," Reed said with a small but confident smile. "It's already in motion. We've hacked into their communication network, and their fleet is about to receive a false flag transmission. We'll make them think we're staging a retreat to lure them in. Once they're close enough, we'll strike with everything we've got." Lydia took a moment to digest the plan. A false flag. It was risky, but she knew that sometimes the only way to defeat a powerful enemy was to make them think they were in control. If Reed's plan worked, the Zorath would be walking into their own destruction. "All right," Lydia said finally, her voice filled with determination. "We'll follow your lead, Commander. But remember, we can't afford to fail. Humanity's future is riding on this." Reed gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Captain. I'll transmit our battle plans to you shortly. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." As the transmission ended, Lydia felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. The plan was bold, but everything hinged on timing. If the Zorath caught on before the trap was sprung, it would mean the end for them all. "Malik, prep the fleet for movement. We need to be ready for anything," Lydia ordered. She turned to Tessa. "Lieutenant, make sure our weapons are ready to fire on my command. We'll be dealing with more than just their ships. We'll be facing their entire force. I want us prepared." The crew began to spring into action, a renewed sense of purpose taking hold. But as they prepared for what would be the final battle, Lydia couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their very existence. They would either emerge victorious or they would fall, with the galaxy remembering the human race as little more than a blip on the timeline of the universe. Lydia walked over to the large window at the front of the command deck, staring out at the dark expanse of space once more. This time, however, she didn't feel alone. With Reed's reinforcements, the fleet, and the human spirit behind them, humanity had one last shot at victory. They would fight for every colony, every life, and every future child who might one day gaze up at the stars with the hope of something better. The time for running was over. The time for showing the galaxy what humanity was capable of had arrived. This part introduces Commander Jackson Reed and sets the stage for the alliance between him and Captain Matthews. It builds the tension and excitement for the upcoming battle, while showing humanity's resolve and resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. The Zorath Empire had always believed themselves to be superior. Their fleets were vast, their weapons devastating, and their tactics nearly flawless. They had conquered planet after planet, crushing any resistance with ruthless efficiency. To them, humanity was a species to be disregarded, primitive, weak, and easy to conquer. But as the Zorath fleet approached the final battleground, something began to change. The Empire's leaders were confident, too confident. They had seen humanity retreat from every fight, beaten down but not yet broken. The human commanders, who had once been feared for their unpredictability, now appeared to be little more than survivors clinging to the edge of oblivion. The Zorath thought they had seen the last of humanity's strength. They were wrong. "Fleet, Commander Largus," said the Zorath officer standing before the massive command screen, his voice full of contempt. "The humans are gathering their last forces. They have no real power left. They're weak." Fleet Commander Largus, a towering figure with a face covered in sharp, angular features, nodded. "Yes, I know, they're cornered, desperate. Their colonies are destroyed. Their military is shattered. They'll attempt a final stand, but it won't last long. We'll wipe them out like all the others." Largus had seen the human fleet's final positions. Their ships were scattered, nearly crippled from previous battles. They had nowhere left to run, and the Zorath believed they were on the verge of victory. "Prepare the fleet," Largus continued, his voice cold. "We'll destroy them swiftly and end their pathetic resistance. Their last hope is a feeble attempt to surprise us, but we know better. The humans have nothing left." On the bridge of the TSS Perseverance, Lydia Matthews stood, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the stars through the viewports. They were about to do the impossible. Their plan, if executed correctly, would turn the tide. But she knew it depended on complete surprise. The Zorath had underestimated humanity before, and now was their chance to make them pay for it. "We're ready, Captain," Lieutenant Tessa Brooks said from the weapons station. Her voice was steady, but Lydia could sense the tension in her tone. "We've made the final adjustments to the weapon systems. The stealth ships are in position and we're just waiting for the signal." Lydia nodded, her mind running through every detail of the plan one last time. Commander Reed's fleet had arrived with an arsenal of new technologies. Stealth ships capable of cloaking themselves from enemy sensors, advanced energy shields that could absorb enemy fire, and new weapons that disrupted Zorath systems. The humans had taken every advantage they could, but the most important factor was the element of surprise. If the Zorath discovered their intentions too soon, the whole plan would collapse. "Lieutenant, how much longer until we begin?" Lydia asked, her eyes fixed on the coordinates where the Zorath fleet was closing in. "We have 30 minutes, Captain," Tessa replied. "Once we send out the false flag transmission, the Zorath will think we're retreating. We'll have the perfect opportunity to strike." Lydia took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. They had fought too long and too hard for this moment. This final stand would determine everything. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity. They would make sure the galaxy remembered them. "Very well," Lydia said, her voice firm. "Malik, send the signal. Let's make them think we're on the run." Ensign Malik, stationed at the communications console, quickly typed in the commands. "Signal sent, Captain. The Zorath should be receiving it now." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The crew could only wait, knowing the Zorath fleet was about to bite the bait. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was humanity's only chance. On the bridge of the Zorath flagship, Fleet Commander Largus watched as the human fleet's transmission arrived. He stared at the screen, a cold smile forming on his face. "They're retreating," he said to his officers. "It's a predictable move. They have nowhere else to go. Prepare to strike." The Zorath ships moved forward, their massive engines pushing them toward the supposed retreating humans. They didn't know it yet, but they were walking straight into a trap. Back on the TSS Perseverance, Lydia felt her heart race. She knew they had to act quickly. Once the Zorath realized they had been deceived, it would be a battle to the death. "Launch the stealth ships," she ordered. The crew responded instantly, the tension rising as the ships cloaked themselves, vanishing from the Zorath sensors. The rest of the fleet powered up their weapons, ready to strike when the time was right. But Lydia held her breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. As the Zorath fleet drew closer, Lydia gave the signal. Now. In an instant, the human fleet erupted into action. The stealth ships deactivated their cloaks, revealing their positions just as the first wave of Zorath ships entered the firing zone. Human weapons fired with deadly accuracy, and for a moment the Zorath fleet hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected barrage. Explosions rocked the Zorath ships, their once impenetrable shields failing under the intense assault. The Zorath commanders scrambled to regroup, but it was already too late. The humans had taken full advantage of their surprise, launching a fierce coordinated attack that threw the Zorath forces into chaos. "Report," Lydia demanded, her eyes never leaving the battle unfolding on the screen. "Direct hit on their command ship, Captain," Tessa called out. "We've taken out several of their lead ships. Their fleet is in disarray." Lydia allowed herself a brief grim smile. The Zorath, so sure of their victory, had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back when cornered. They had underestimated the human will to survive. But the battle was far from won. The Zorath were still a formidable force, and though their advance had been slowed, they were not defeated yet. "Stay focused," Lydia said, her voice unwavering. "We need to press our advantage. Keep up the pressure, and don't let them recover." The battle raged on, humanity's fleets pushing forward with all their might. It was a fight they could not afford to lose. In the depths of space, as the Zorath scrambled to regroup, one thing became clear. They had severely underestimated humanity. The humans had no intention of going quietly. They had proven once again that when faced with extinction, they would rise from the ashes and fight with everything they had. This part highlights the pivotal moment when humanity strikes back, taking advantage of the Zorath's overconfidence. It's a fierce battle that sets the stage for the larger conflict, with humanity making its presence known in the galaxy. Let me know if you'd like any changes. The battle in space had escalated into chaos. Human and Zorath ships fought with the ferocity of animals trapped in a corner. The TSS Perseverance and its fleet of remaining warships had managed to surprise the Zorath, but they knew this initial victory wasn't enough. The Zorath Empire was vast and their forces were formidable. Even with their surprise advantage, humanity was still fighting for its survival. Captain Lydia Matthews stood at the command chair, her eyes glued to the battle. Unfolding on the screen, explosions lit up the dark void as human weapons clashed against Zorath ships. The sound of weapons fire, the crackle of communication static, and the tension in the air filled the bridge with an unspoken weight. "Lieutenant Brooks," Lydia said, her voice calm but firm. "How long until our shields are recharged?" Tessa Brooks, the weapons officer, glanced at her station's readout. "About 3 minutes, Captain. We're taking damage, but our energy levels are holding for now. We're in the fight for the long haul." Lydia nodded, her gaze never leaving the screen. She could see the human fleet slowly wearing down the wide Zorath forces, but she knew it wasn't enough. The Zorath were regrouping. The real fight was just beginning. On the other side of the battlefield, Fleet Commander Largus seethed with rage. His fleet, once thought invincible, had been shattered by humanity's unexpected strike. His ships, many of them severely damaged, were trying to form up again. The humans had caught them off guard, and for a moment, they were losing their advantage. "We cannot allow this to continue," Largus growled, his sharp alien features twisted with fury. "The humans must be crushed. Prepare the reinforcements. We will destroy them now." "Commander," one of his officers hesitated. "We've lost many ships. They are taking heavy damage. If we continue the assault, we might lose even more." Largus turned his cold eyes toward the officer. "Do not question me. We are the Zorath. We do not retreat. We do not fail. Prepare the fleet for another attack. We will finish this." He knew the stakes were high. If the humans had somehow managed to push through their defenses, it would signal a catastrophic loss for the Empire. The Zorath had underestimated humanity once before, and they could not afford to let that mistake happen again. Meanwhile, back on the TSS Perseverance, Lydia's mind raced. The Zorath were more dangerous than they had ever been. The initial surprise attack had damaged them, but now they were recovering. Their reinforcements were on the way, and the human fleet was in no condition to take on an all-out assault. "Ensign Malik," Lydia called out, "what's our status on the reinforcements from Earth?" Malik quickly ran his fingers over the console, pulling up the latest communications. "Admiral Ortiz is still gathering the fleets, Captain. They're not far behind, but they're not here yet. We're going to have to hold the line for as long as we can." Lydia clenched her jaw. The Zorath were pushing forward, and the human fleet was holding on by a thread. But they couldn't wait for reinforcements forever. If they didn't act soon, they might lose the element of surprise entirely. "Get me in contact with Commander Reed," Lydia ordered. A few moments later, Commander Jackson Reed's face appeared on the screen. His expression was as determined as ever, but even he could not hide the concern in his eyes. "We're holding out, Captain," Reed said. "But the Zorath are regrouping. We need more time." Lydia nodded. "I know. We can't wait for reinforcements to arrive. We need to keep them off balance. I'm giving the order to advance. We're going on the offensive. We'll use everything we have left. Reed's eyes narrowed. You're planning a full-on assault? With what? With everything, Lydia replied firmly. We'll make them regret underestimating humanity. We've got the advantage in stealth and unpredictability. They think they have us cornered. Let's show them what happens when you push us too far. Reed hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Understood. We'll support you. But you're right, Captain, this is all or nothing. Lydia watched the commander's image fade as he prepared to mobilize his fleet. The plan was dangerous, but it was their best shot. The human fleet, weakened as it was, could still strike with precision and hit where it hurt most. If they could push the Zorath into a corner, they might just have a chance. Lieutenant Brooks, Lydia said, prepare all weapons. We're going to hit them hard, hit them fast. No hesitation. Brooks, still at her station, responded immediately. Aye. Captain, weapons primed and ready. Ensign Malik, Lydia continued, I want the fleet to fall in behind us. No matter what happens, we keep moving forward. Malik gave a quick nod. Understood, Captain. The tension on the bridge grew as the human fleet gathered its strength. Ships limped forward, their engines sputtering and shields flickering, but there was no turning back now. The final battle was upon them, and Lydia knew they had to make their move before it was too late. Outside the TSS Perseverance, the Zorath fleet continued to form up, their massive ships closing in on the human position. The final confrontation was coming. But what the Zorath didn't know was that the humans had one last card to play. A card that, if played correctly, could change the course of the war. Ready? Tessa called out, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. We're set to fire on your command, Captain. Lydia stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. This is it, she said. All ships, attack. The human fleet erupted into motion, charging forward with everything they had. Energy blasts streaked across the battlefield, slamming into Zorath ships. The Zorath were caught off guard once. More, their formations breaking apart as humanity's ships darted through the chaos, striking with precision. Explosions rocked the Zorath fleet. For a moment, the humans seemed to be winning. But Lydia knew this was only the beginning. The Zorath were not easy enemies to defeat, and they would fight back harder than ever. Push them back, Lydia shouted. Do not let up. As the battle continued, humanity's forces pressed on, determined to make the Zorath pay for underestimating them. But with each passing minute, Lydia felt the weight of the battle more heavily on her shoulders. She had given everything for this moment, and she couldn't afford to fail now. This part focuses on the intense battle for humanity's survival, with Lydia Matthews taking a bold, offensive approach against the Zorath forces. The Zorath, believing they had already won, are thrown off balance once again by humanity's relentless spirit. Let me know if you'd like to adjust anything. The sound of explosions echoed throughout the battlefield, tearing through the silence of space like thunder in a storm. Humanity's fleet had launched their full offensive, and for a moment, it seemed like the tide was turning. The Zorath, once so sure of their victory, were now struggling to keep their forces together. The human ships moved like a swarm of wasps, darting in and out of Zorath lines, striking with deadly precision and leaving behind burning wrecks of enemy vessels. Captain Lydia Matthews stood at the helm of the TSS Perseverance, her eyes locked on the view of the space battle outside. Every fiber of her being was focused on the moment, knowing that humanity's survival depended on how well they executed this strike. Her crew had followed her into the firestorm, and now they would either emerge victorious or be crushed under the weight of the Zorath's counterattack. Captain, we've taken out 3 of their lead ships, Lieutenant Tessa Brooks reported, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Their shields are beginning to fail. We can break through if we keep up the pressure. Lydia nodded. Good work, Lieutenant. Keep the fire concentrated on their flagship. We need to break their command structure. Without leadership, they'll fall apart. Brooks adjusted the targeting systems, and the ship fired again, sending a volley of energy blasts toward the Zorath command ship. The shots hit their mark, sparking a violent explosion on the enemy flagship. The Zorath, shaken by the attack, were starting to panic. For a moment it felt like they were losing their grip on the battlefield. "Ensign Malik, status report," Lydia asked, her voice steady. Malik's face appeared on the screen, sweat beading on his forehead. "Captain, the Zorath are scrambling to regroup, but their lines are falling apart. It's as if they don't know where to focus their attack. We've got them on the ropes." Lydia took a deep breath. "Good. We have to keep pushing. We can't give them any room to recover." Despite the chaos outside, the crew of the TSS Perseverance worked with relentless efficiency. The ship was battered, but it was still fighting. As Lydia surveyed the battle unfolding before her, she knew they had one chance to end this war. The Zorath were overconfident, and now humanity was showing them what happens when you underestimate the will to survive. But the battle was far from over. As Lydia watched, the Zorath fleet started to reorganize. Their remaining ships began to regroup, and a new wave of reinforcements arrived, pushing forward with renewed determination. The humans were still outnumbered, and the Zorath were more dangerous than ever. "They're sending in reinforcements," Tessa called out. "This could be a problem, Captain." Lydia's eyes narrowed. The Zorath were not going to give up so easily. "We'll need to push even harder," she said, her voice unwavering. "Activate the hidden weapons." The crew knew exactly what she meant. Hidden deep within the TSS Perseverance were weapons humanity had kept secret. Experimental technology they had designed for this very moment. Weapons that could change the course of the battle. "Lieutenant Brooks, are we ready?" Lydia asked. "Ready, Captain," Tessa replied. "Activating now." The TSS Perseverance shuddered as the hidden weapon systems powered up. Suddenly, a massive energy surge shot from the ship's hull, sending out a wave of energy that disrupted the Zorath systems. Their shields flickered and their weapons began to misfire, throwing their fleet into further disarray. "Now," Lydia shouted, "we hit them while they're vulnerable." Human ships, guided by their commander's orders, unleashed everything they had left. Blasts of energy tore through Zorath ships, cutting through their defenses and sending them into chaos. It was the final push humanity needed. The Zorath fleet, once so sure of their victory, was now being torn apart, their massive warships reduced to floating wrecks in the cold void of space. "Captain, we've got a direct hit on their flagship," Tessa cried. "Their main command center is destroyed. The Zorath are retreating." Lydia let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a turning point. The Zorath, their leadership shattered and their fleet in tatters, were no longer in control. "Push them back," Lydia ordered. "We're not letting them regroup. All ships focus on their retreating forces. We finish this now." The TSS Perseverance surged forward, followed by the remaining human fleet. The Zorath, disoriented and leaderless, tried to retreat, but it was too late. Humanity's relentless offensive had caught them in the open, and there was no way for the Zorath to escape. "Captain, we've broken their lines," Ensign Malik reported. "Their ships are scattering, and many are attempting to flee." "Let them run," Lydia said. "We've won." But even as the Zorath retreated, Lydia knew the cost of victory. The human fleet had taken heavy damage. The TSS Perseverance itself was barely holding together, and many of their ships had been lost. But despite the devastation, there was a sense of triumph in the air. Humanity had done the impossible. Against all odds, they had fought back the might of the Zorath Empire and proved that they were not a species to be underestimated. The galaxy would remember this day. Humanity had shown that when pushed to the edge, they would rise up and fight back with everything they had. "Lieutenant Brooks, scan for any remaining Zorath forces," Lydia said, her voice quieter now, but still full of determination. "I'm scanning now, Captain," Brooks responded. "We've accounted for almost all of their ships. There are a few stragglers, but nothing significant." Lydia looked out at the void of space, the silence settling over them like a blanket. The battle had been won, but the war was not over yet. The Zorath had been driven back, but they would return, and humanity would be ready. But for now, the crew of the TSS Perseverance allowed themselves a moment of relief. They had survived. They had brought hell to their enemies, and they had won. The human fleet had proven once again that they would never be taken down without a fight.